MoneyFM 89.3, the best of Saturday mornings. Wide World on MoneyFM 89.3.
In our Wide World segment, Rewrite the Rules is a book out by Ritu Mehrish and Rakshita Saxena, and talking about empowering Asian women leaders to challenge the status quo, redefine success on their own terms. It is a call to action looking at embracing power and breaking free from limiting beliefs. Ritu is with us now in the studio to talk about it. Good morning, Ritu.
Morning. Good to be here.
Good. You interviewed some 200 women from across Asia. Tell us about how you came up with the concept for this book and what you were hoping to find, to uncover.
Okay, great. So what happened was actually last maybe 6-7 years, I've been doing a lot of work with women leaders in Asia. And one of the things that actually, there are a couple of things, but the first thing that stood out for me as I was researching, reading books and articles, I realized there are lots of books, articles that have been written with a Western lens, and they're great models, they're great frameworks, models, but a lot of stories, anecdotes, examples that were there in those books or articles or even interviews, they were all with a Western lens, and they were missing out the nuances of Asia, whether it's socio-economic, whether it's cultural, societal, anything. And I was like, why is that? There are such smart women in the region. Why aren't we talking about them? Why aren't we amplifying their voices? Why aren't we hearing about them? So that actually was the trigger point for me to start my own podcast with the same name, Rewrite the Rules, where I interview women leaders from the region, women who've achieved certain things. And then the other thing was that when I was talking to women, emerging women leaders in the region, I realized they're always looking for role models. One of the things they always say, we don't have enough role models or we need more role models. And not any role models, but what I called relatable role models, who probably, again, come from the similar backgrounds that we've come, whose story kind of resonates with us. We can, relate to them. So those were really a couple of reasons why I thought, okay, maybe there is something to be done here. And, the podcast gave me insights. Then I went on to talk to many more women. We ran a survey to kind of get a lot of inputs. And that's how we actually collected information from, I would say, about 300 to 400 women.
Wow.
And 200 is where we had survey, interviews, in-depth storytelling and things like that.
I'm fascinated by this idea, and I completely agree. Obviously, the differences and the nuances between these Western models and Asian models. What are they? What are some of the differences for business leaders, female business leaders in this part of the world?
Right.
As compared to the West, that were being missed in the existing literature?
Yeah. So for example, let's say small things. So I guess at the meta level or macro level, I think there are similarities. Things like a little bit of unconscious bias, microaggression, the pay parity. Those are similar. So that's a similarity. Then comes the nuances of, society, culture, even language. So for example, let's say if we talk about culture, there is this inherent, especially in Asian context, there is this inherent belief or like maybe mindset or agreement that a woman is going to be the caretaker, right? Whether it's with family or even with the elders in the family, or, with the in-laws set up and things like that, right? So that's one. So the culture. The other thing is things like, not being too loud, being a little bit submissive, don't put too much of spotlight on yourself. That's, again, very cultural, very Asia compared to the West. And I have spent quite a number of years working in the US and UK, so I also had that exposure. So I constantly was comparing both, right? The other thing is language, which was actually very fascinating for me because we assume in Asia everybody speaks English. Well, that's not the case, right? I've had the opportunity to work with really smart women from Thailand, from Vietnam, from Indonesia, who are really smart. But when they were in a meeting room or on conference calls, when their counterparts let's say, were in the US or, English-speaking thing, they always found themselves fumbling a bit because English is not their first language, right? So they had all this intellect, but when it came to communication, it took a hit on their confidence, right? Or they came across as they don't know their stuff, and they were often overlooked because of the language barrier. So that was the other piece.
Fascinating.
That's fascinating. Yeah, we're talking with Ritu Mehrish, the author of Rewrite the Rules, talking about Asian women leaders challenging the status quo, redefining their success. What are the top maybe 2 or 3 qualities that you saw in these women that you talked to, some 400 women? You mentioned, obviously, super intelligent. They know their topic, they know their industry, their business. But aside from that, you mentioned there were some communication struggles, perhaps. Where are the women in Asia overperforming or really excelling?
Correct. And I will actually add, so while the differences, I actually talked a lot about the things that they did not have here, but there are also things that Asian women have a head start on.
Yeah.
For example, the ecosystem, the support function, the ability to have, let's say, an affordable childcare or, support in terms of family and even getting external help, that definitely gives them a head start, by the way, compared to, women who are working in the Western world. So that's definitely a head start.
And maybe also multiple languages.
Absolutely.
In the West, they're probably monolingual, but in this part of the world, there's maybe at least 2 languages, sometimes 3.
Exactly. And in fact, that's something that we write in the book, that he leveraged that.
Yeah.
That, having, and also having the experience of actually working in the West, like somebody like me who's worked, 15 years almost in the West, but I'm in Asia now. So I sit in this really unique position of having views on both the worlds. And I leverage that all the time, right? So that's the other thing that a lot of Asian leaders have, that they have exposure of working in the West and working here. So I think that those are the head start. But just coming back to your question on what are some of the things that they've really done well.
Yeah.
One, they've really mastered the art of building strong allies around them. Great network, a great ecosystem that they keep leveraging on, whether it's other women, whether it's men, or even their family, even the organization. So they've really mastered that, because I think that has been, that's one of the themes that came out, is that if you really build a strong allyship or group of allies around you, they became they gave you that boost in your career. So that was one, that a lot of these women did that. And the second thing that they really did well is to work on their confidence, and not let things like language or things like the differences be like a handicap rather than leveraged it. We've got great stories where people have said, or women leaders have said, how they leveraged, again, to your point, Neil, about using multiple language, right? Somebody who's worked in the West took on this really great assignment in China because, she was from China. She understood the language. She understood the dynamics there. That kind of put her up there in the company thing, right? So leveraging the difference, wherever the women leaders have leveraged their differences and used that as a superpower rather than a handicap, they've succeeded.
Where are they coming down, though? There are very much systemic challenges across Asia, women on boards, things like that. Now, the numbers are getting better, the percentages are getting better, but they're still not as good as perhaps some of their Western counterparts.
Yeah.
How are they handling, the best and brightest that you talk to, the ongoing systemic challenges within organizations or mindsets in organizations?
Right. And that's a really interesting question, because one of the things that we've tried, that we've said in the book is we control what we control, right? So while, of course, we can all complain about the systemic issues and things like that, but that women alone cannot solve for. And we should not have to solve for it, right? Because we need the entire population to come together to solve that thing, right?
Yeah.
But small things we can do. And the whole theme of the book is really about own it. Own it is our tag word, that whatever you're doing, you have to own that thing, right? So for example, the younger women leaders, we are saying, starting at home, set the right boundaries that you need to, right? So because systemic things will not change on their own till we put some of those things, and they start at home. So one of the things we talk a lot about in the book is setting boundaries, whether it's in a personal life or professional life. Young women leaders who are becoming, let's say, mothers for the first time, right? How do you set that up in the family? How do you divide the work or the household thing that you're doing, between you and your partner, right? So it starts from there. say? How do you ask for the right amount of leaves or right amount of flexibility from the organization? So really taking charge and saying we need not just wait for somebody to make those changes, but ask for those changes and then see from there. If somebody says no, then you work through it. But probably 7 out of 10 times people will agree and do it.
Love that. That's the micro level. What can you do more at the macro level? I mean, I know a friend of the show, MP Louis Ng, he's in Parliament all the time trying to get more paternity leave in Singapore to help women go back to work. So it's also the other side of the fence. It's more what men can do to make it easier for women. So what can we do? What can women do at the macro level to get that systemic change?
Yeah. I think women have to talk more about the challenges they face. Sometimes, sometimes what happens when women start to talk about their challenges, they think, they'll be looked at as the whiny aunts or, there you go, agony aunts, or there you go, complaining. But I guess we need to talk about it. But talk about it in a way which is more solution focused. Because I've also seen really smart women when I talk to them, what are the challenges you face? And they're like, like nothing, really. Like, I didn't really face this challenge or something like that, right? So we sometimes, women ourselves, are trying to whitewash everything and say, no, it was fine. The reality is it was not fine. Everybody went through their own journey. And by the way, that includes me too. There was a point where somebody asked me, so you worked with GE, with P&G. Did you face anything? And I would say, no, I really never faced anything. Till somebody actually sat me down and said, hey, Ritu, you saw this success, which is good. But maybe your success could have been even more if you had, looked at some of these things. And the other thing is, just because you did not face it doesn't mean nobody else faces it, right? And that was like a really aha moment for me, because I was one of those people who thought, no, I didn't face any challenges. The reality is that's not the case. So I would think women can do a better job at that. Just talk more about it, but also talk about it, which is in a way that, okay, we faced it, we overcame it, but what can we do now to make sure others don't have to go through it?
We're talking with Ritu Mehrish, the author of Rewrite the Rules. What about champions? So many women have benefited, women and men have benefited from both male and female champions in their sphere of influence, whatever they're doing. Does this come up in your discussions in the book that people either had, call it what you want, a champion, a mentor, whatever? How important are those folks?
Huge. I think that came up time and time again, that how nobody achieved the success they achieved without these mentors, sponsors, champions, whatever you may want to call it, right? And I think they play a very critical role. One thing I do tell other women leaders is that you don't need to get to a position of power, or you think, only when I'm senior, I will do this. You can become an ally at every stage of your career and of your life. You don't need to be a VP to become an ally or a sponsor. Even if you're starting out, there'll be somebody who's kind of, who's probably starting out earlier in the journey, and you can always be their ally. So we don't have to wait for that. And secondly, I think it also starts from home. How do we get our boys more involved in this conversation early on? I mean, in the family, I have a boy and a girl, and we're constantly trying to bring this up. Like when I was writing this book, my boy was equally involved. He was kind of surprised when I talked to him about some of these things. He's 15. He's like, I didn't realize these. Really, mommy? Like they happen? I'm like, yes. So, so I think we need to educate our kids also much younger.
That's a great point, and it leads in beautifully to what I was going to ask you, which is, why should men read this book?
Men need to read this book because it's very, it'll give them insight into sometimes which they may be oblivious to, and not because they don't want to know, but it's not the intention is wrong. It's probably because they never faced it, right? So something you don't face, you normally don't even...
You don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know, exactly. Yeah. And men with all the right intentions don't know. So therefore, I think it'll be a great insight into some of the challenges. But also, men can read this and say, hey, now I know where I can go and support women better. Because sometimes, again, people have the right intention, but they don't know what's the best way to support. Because let's face it, it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes if you do too much, like especially from a men's point of view, because I also work with a lot of male leaders, and sometimes they're sitting on that fence saying, if I do too much, then am I patronizing? If I don't do, then I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
So
it's a very difficult time to be a man in the business environment, right? Because you're not really sure what to do in certain circumstances.
I agree. And Glenn, that is something that comes up so much in my coaching. And you'll be surprised, even though I've written a book on women leaders, but when my one-on-one coaching, 90% of my coaches are men. So I know that side too. So so you're right, it's very tricky. Yeah. And therefore, I think the book can be of some help in that aspect.
Top takeaways, maybe a top 3 takeaways of the book that you'd like to leave everybody with.
Actually, if there's one message, that is to women leaders, please own it. Do what you can do. Don't look for somebody else to come and, salvage you out. Like that whole knight in shining armor, like that story has to go out. You have to take charge. And I think for men, find out what are different ways you can support women. I think those would be the 2 things I would say.
Awesome.
Wonderful, yeah. Where can people, I put on my author's marketing hat now. Where can people get your book? The full title, it's published by Penguin. Where can they get the book?
Okay, so multiple places, Amazon, worldwide and in Singapore, but also in bookstores. So Kinokuniya, Bookworm, Epigram, any of the bookstores, you'll get it there.
Awesome. We wish you great success. Ritu Mehrish, Rewrite the Rules is the name of the book. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.